just in case. We don't want to have to go through another difficulty. Okay. Did you start recording?
Yep, we've both started recording.
Okay, awesome. So we'll introduce ourselves again because Andrew wasn't here. I'm Amia. Andrew, introduce yourself.
Sorry. Yeah. Hi, I'm Andrew, and sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm on my phone now. So
okay. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. So we will just go ahead and start. First thing we wanted to say is we're really, really honored to have you with us through Zoom, despite our technical difficulties. So this year, our history class is actually taking part in a project. I'm pretty sure Dr. Nina has already spoke to you about it, called Phantoms of the Past.
Again, something about revolution and.
Yeah, so we're trying to dig into research about like enslavement, resistance, and all of that in the Atlantic world. Yeah, so that's what it is. If you want to introduce yourself, what you do, that would be awesome.
Okay, my name's Ross Martin. What do I do? I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm an activist, I'm a mother and about to be grandmother. I think they all in together, really. And yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay.
All right, perfect. It's awesome to meet you.
Oh, yeah. You're the next generation. So, you know, in terms of young people coming up and just carving and making the world a better one than we inherited. I just feel all that.
So we're trying. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So I'm sure you have already looked at the questions that we are going to ask. Andrew's actually going to start asking the first four, and then Michelle's going to ask the middle four, and I will just end it off with my questions at the end. So Andrew, if you want to take the lead on that.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to. Ross, if you feel comfortable sharing what life experiences have brought you to be part of this movement, or would you more define yourself as fighting for justice and civil rights for everyone?
Well, it's an interesting one. I did look at that and think, well, how did I get where I am? I kind of think it's partly arriving in Bristol. I've lived here now 25 years, and I came from London, and was just really quite trying to work out what was actually going on in the city in terms of the narrative around kind of its Black population, who I knew has kind of lived here for a long time. I couldn't really find a lot. So I suppose it's partly looking, observing, seeing inequality and injustice, just the lack of visibility of people kind of, doing ordinary things that I kind of take for granted living in London, and just really meeting people, I suppose, critical people. We had a very interesting older gentleman who became a dear friend. And so I was sitting on the African History Month committee of a cultural arts centre in Bristol called Kumba. And he kind of just kept going off on a tangent, and I realized he had a wealth of information. So I asked him at one meeting, could he bring in his CV in, which was a bit rude, I suppose, but lo and behold, the next meeting he brought in his CV, and I was like, oh my God, within our midst was someone extraordinary. He'd been part of the one of the original founding members of the People's National Party of Jamaica, and campaigning, spent time in prison. He struggled for decolonization in 1930s Jamaica. And when I kind of realized who he was and what he'd done, I stuck to his side, became a dear friend. He is a historian, so he gave me a lot of books. I suppose around decolonization in the Caribbean. My mother, 97 years old, is from the Caribbean. My late father from Nigeria. I suppose it's always about trying to make sense of what we've inherited and the discrepancies. I think for all of us, when we're quite young, you kind of grow up and then you kind of think how the world is presented to you. At some point, you kind of looking at, well, that doesn't quite make sense. And you're just asking yourself a lot of questions. You know, why is this like that? You know, why is there no narrative, no history that actually talks about Black people who live in the city, you know, their struggles. So partly through Richard, who just said, let's just do it. And which is really about education in schools, in secondary schools. So we set up our history, our heritage in 2002. And I suppose it's really from there, the countering Colston, it was, again, just niggled me. It didn't come first of all, I just made a decision because we have this huge arts venue, music venue, named after a 17th century slave merchant. And I knew massive attack and had made a decision not to play in the hall. I thought, well, that's the good news. I did actually see one event in it. I think it was Sweet Honey in the Rock did a performance, and I just felt really uncomfortable. And I kind of thought, no, it doesn't sit with me. I can't relax. I can't enjoy this. So made a decision. Well, I wouldn't actually kind of go back until the name has been changed, really. And I found myself in 2007, which is the bicentenary of the abolition of transatlantic slavery that was being marked in Bristol, to a very noisy effect. There's an organization called the Consortium of Black Groups, and the decision was not to get involved in any of the commemorations and celebrations. So what we did, you know, as an artist, I got some funding from the Arts Council and thought it was the same year as Richard Hart, the Caribbean historian I mentioned earlier, his 90th birthday, and kind of thought, why not do a tribute to him? You know, the extraordinary work and struggle he'd had, just put his life on stage, which we did in song and dance and poetry. It was a show. And I found myself actually spending a lot of time outside the hall, both chalking, you know, because events would just keep being piled on in there. You know, I was really incensed when a Paul Robeson event was put on in there. So I just sort of just got whoever I could, usually they were fellow artists, and would just be outside with petitions and chalk, just chalking on the ground and speaking to people. Sometimes we could stop the artist and actually say, are you aware you're doing a performance in a building named after a 17th century slave merchant? I think Fela Kuti's son was playing there, and he did stop his performance to say that there were people outside campaigning. You know, he would have liked to know more about the situation and maybe would have decided not to have actually performed. I do remember it reported that the whole, you know, the house went up as well in cheers. So I think, you know, it's kind of been ongoing in lots of different ways. Countering Colston probably came together about 6 years ago, when a fellow artist was doing a recording about protests. I have to say, Bristol is a city with a long history of protest and activism. You know, there's the Bristol riots of local people in 1831, you know, just really, I suppose, partly about, you know, kind of expanding franchise, seeing that the wealthy was so wealthy at the expense of very, you know, kind of ordinary citizens' lives. So I kind of, it's kind of great when you have people that just actually think the same way and join in, you know, because it kind of feels like for a long time, I'm not saying there's been lots of people doing different things or saying different things, but it was a particular artist, a young artist, I have to say, was doing something on protest. She was doing something around Pero. And Pero, there's a bridge named after him in the center. And he came with Fanny Coco. I don't know if you're aware, I did a piece in an installation in the Georgian House Museum of the 18th century maidservant. And Perrault's mother, I tell a lie, it wasn't Perrault's mother, it was Fanny Coker's mother and Perrault arrived together in Bristol in not Bristol, in London, in 1783 with the Pinneys. I'm just trying to, I've lost my train of thought then. What was I saying? Something about, yeah, she did something to Perrault and ran around the town centre with a t-shirt with just printed, "Who is Perrault?" ? And she kind of asked me to come to talk about, my thoughts and positionings, around things. There was a group of us, and we were talking about the celebrations that took place in the cathedral at that time when school children that were sponsored by the Venturous Trust, which is an arm of the Society of the Merchant Venturous, kind of go in and kind of celebrate Colston. There's a whole number of celebrations that used to take place, probably about in November. And she was the next schoolgirl of one of these schools that she said, yes, we used to wear these chrysanthemums, his favourite flower, and what else they used to do. The head boy and head girl would take a big wreath and put it at the foot of the statue. Anyway, and she was saying, oh, it's coming up next week. Why don't we go? And it was literally like that on that moment. Why don't we just go and protest outside? So I think that was about 2014. And, obviously the beauty of having social media is that, when people use it, other people come out. So I think there was probably about 20 of us. Kind of, some of us knew each other, some of us didn't. So we converged upon the cathedral. And then we kind of made a decision that we would do that every year. Obviously, the dean came out and he was like, oh, what are you doing? Actually, the first year, we kind of thought about it because I thought, actually, if you're year 7, which is the first year of secondary school, I was quite concerned not to alarm them. So what we did do, we actually devised a leaflet, which is, why are we protesting outside your school memorial today? Mm-hmm. It was done really very simply in very simple language and kindly giving them an outline and suggesting that they go to the library next door to get more information. And the young students, as they were keen to pick up the leaflet, and we were being restrained by the teachers who were really kind of put out. Mm-hmm. And so, well, you can give them to them. We were told we were accosting them. Just give them to them then. And obviously children being children, they kind of just, as the teachers' backs were turned, came up and were grabbing leaflets. So that was the campaign. I've probably gone off the point a bit, really, but
it's all good. Great to hear your thoughts about this question.
Yeah, it was keen not to, at that stage, not to come together necessarily as a group. We were just a collection of individuals. Some of us were teachers, some of us were artists, and some of us were historians. And two of them, Roger and Mark, they've actually kind of produced a book on Colston that's come out this year. Trying to think, just doing a huge amount of research. And there's a lot of information out there, but who actually puts it together? Who actually kind of highlights critical issues? So it's kind of good the book was out. So that was us. And then we decided we would meet formally, become formal, kind of decided on a name. But really, it's just quite a small group. People think it's big. We've got who's joined us. There's a woman who's recently kind of joined us, which is really quite interesting because she's a descendant of an enslaved African, the Daniels, who were one of the big merchants in the city, and he was a Society of Merchant Venture, and he received one of the largest payouts of the compensation that were paid to slave owners, um, in 1833, I think it was. So she's actually approached the Society of Merchant Ventures. She's only realised, and then there's also an individual in Bristol. Some of these families are old families and they still live in the city. So there's always this kind of contention around, I think the different of us, we kind of want different things. We don't necessarily all speak with one voice, but really there isn't a memorial in the city that remembers, acknowledges enslaved Africans who built the wealth of the city. So, and I kind of think, obviously 2020, with the toppling of the statue, it's kind of created a huge amount of awareness, debate. I was kind of listening earlier, I'm watching online actually, the removal of a statue in Barbados, Nelson statue in the centre. And just all around the world, people are actually thinking, more deeply as this colonial inheritance and what it means and what it is that we can do together. I can't say, anything I can do on my own. I can only do it, with support of other people and voices and activism. I think particularly an example in raising Daughters of Igbo Women. I don't know if you've seen the film at all. It is going out online, but it was a film that was made partly in Nigeria, partly in Bristol, UK. I did a Bristol, UK. I got a artist and writer and filmmakers in Nigeria to do the Nigerian, and then partly in St. Kitts and Nevis. And it's really reclaiming the story of Fanny Coker, the maidservant of the Georgian House, Bristol. And really because there was no mention of her, and she lived in a Georgian house. The Georgian house is one of those houses, an 18th century house. It's very finely decorated. The merchants, the Pinneys, who were slave owners, they had plantations in Nevis. When they left, they came to the UK, and the house is just left as a museum, but it doesn't speak to the narrative of the enslaved. So part of making this digital installation is to bring the voices and a kind of voice that speaks through the centuries to now. And we also did a memorial tribute to her. So you've got a mother, you've got three generations. You've got Fanny Coker, you got her mother in Nevis, and then you got the grandmother back in former Igbo land, and how they were permanently separated. So it just felt very symbolic, having three voices, recreating voices for each generation of the women and bringing them together. And we had a live memorial tribute in the graveyard where her final remains lie under a very generic stone. So it kind of brings the history alive, but you kind of need markers, monuments, so that everyone and the next generation can actually kind of learn. I think it's more about how did we ever get into a state whereby we were enslaving people, and the kind of building of the wealth in the city needs to be acknowledged.
I agree, and I really appreciate your response. That was amazing. And I have another question here for you. That is, how do you think that those monuments and statues that are not positive representation of maybe like progressive movements, but the negative ones we see being taken down so often, how do you think they reflect the places they're in? The ones that are still standing, I mean.
in some ways, for me, I haven't got a problem. I think with Colston, is significant in Bristol because it's not just a statue. It's got a huge kind of tomb in what's it called? Saint. I don't think what the place is called. All Saints Church. Huge tomb. It's got lots and lots of roads and named after him, and I think it is, for me, it's about the disingenuous nature of power in relation to oppression. And I think I'm not into pulling down all the statues. It's about creating a narrative and a voice of people and their own struggles and their own history. They're always there. There are lots of uprisings, I'm sure you're well aware of, kind of across the Caribbean. And it's kind of those voices we need a kind of balanced view of history that recognizes how people themselves determine their own destiny, and they kind of it's kind of what is being celebrated and why. And that 19th century, because most of those monuments, I don't know if they're same for Canada as well, the period in which most of these monuments have gone up, it's kind of a particular period of history. It's kind of, it's how we create the societies. I think in every place they've got their own journey. You must have the same, I suppose, with Indigenous people in Canada. But I think for Bristol, it is about the inequalities. There was a report that came out only 3 years ago, the Runnymede report, and it cited Bristol as the worst place to grow up in if you're of African heritage, and in terms of education and in terms of employment outcomes. And that's nothing to be proud of. So I think it's trying to close those gaps and empower and put resources where it needs to be put to level up and dignify. And I think just having narratives about the best of people, the examples where people have struggled on behalf of their fellow humanity to improve society, it's got to be good for all of us.
Oh, great, thank you. And for my last question, what do you see as the key objectives of the Countering Colston movement? Like, what do you think what are the next things the movement needs to do?
The memorial, there is some talk, but I think you're very good at talking. There's a lot of talk, and it'll be interesting what actually gets translated into action. I think, some kind of memorial. And I was kind of thinking, I was writing a article for a journal, really about the installations at the Georgian House, the Daughters of Ibo Women. It's going online, as I say, so I'll give you the link. I'm thinking, I came across a quote by Toni Morrison, the late Toni Morrison, and she was saying there isn't anything, not even a bench in a road by the wayside. And it's a beautiful quote. I will read it to you. I can find it. And I just thought that is so simple and could be doable. It's just having benches right across the city with little plaques on them that respond to the struggles, of enslaved ancestors, whether they're Toussaint Louverture's, I'm shot. And you can go right into present day, looking at, struggles and quotes that inspire. And then you've got a place of reflection. And if you come across the bench, some of them can be around significant buildings or areas of the city, which wouldn't be hard enough because most of the city is carved in some kind of building that's been, raised on the back of enslavement. But also just, kind of randomly in places with quite natural beauty. And we've got some wonderful kind of spots. I actually live along a river. There's a river just at the back, at the front of the house, the Frome Valley. And so people can actually sit and reflect, on humanity the worst and the best, really. I think we constantly need those reminders because it's very easy to switch. There's a report that's come out in this week at the number of the march of the far right, and they've been on a march for a long time, as far as I'm concerned, across Europe. But yeah, and that's what the struggle is. It's for decency and justice to prevail, and I think that's always the case. So we've always got to be vigilant, and we've always got to, to struggle for truth. Be a witness. Speaking truth to power.
That's true.
Great, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to ask a few questions now. So why do you think Edward Colston was kind of the focus of the Countering Colston movement this last year? Why is he the one that there is so much rallying about? Is there something about him that makes it easier to motivate or rally people towards the common goal?
I think you'd have to live in Bristol for a while to actually see the way. If you're a visitor to the city, you'd think, who is, you wouldn't spend very long if you're in the centre before you kind of your eyes will be, think, oh, who is this guy, this amazing guy, this is named after him, this not named after him. It was interesting since the toppling, people are quite quick to remove the name kind of now. I think it's partly because we still have this society of merchant venturers in the city that operate. So it's almost like a continual narrative of, I don't know, I'm just trying to think what it is. I think there's a question looked at, well, what is it that they do? You kind of think, well, where is it they invest their money in? There's someone that's really quite interested in looking at tracing the slavery compensation money for the merchants in the city and see where it's been. We kind of know it's built things like the, just trying to think, there was a big cotton factory in the city, there was a tobacco factory. But in terms of nowadays, just continually tracing the trail so we can actually see what it is they invest their money in, whether it's armament, whether it's, I don't know, what else would there be? I suppose drugs,
Yeah.
pharmaceutical, the big things,
The
oil.
the big things that people invest in, yes.
The all
Yes.
big, multinational, kind of thing. And yes, so, that is going on, from the historians amongst us. Why Edward Colston? Because why is he? I say, well, why is he such a big figure? Because he has been deemed for a long time as the founding father, of the city, this great philanthropist, this narrative. I'm sure you've seen the wording that's remained on the plate to our wisest, noblest son.
Oh.
It just hurts, doesn't it? And you just think, you can't get away with this. I mean, if you followed the narrative, it's been for many years a lot of irking, around the statue. It's been, lots of interventions by artists, by anarchists, by, and that's quite nice because you do have that energy in Bristol. I can remember going to a meeting once and they were deciding to put, what's it when you just put up posters, fly posting, isn't it? Fly posting. And they were saying, well, how do you do it? Well, you just put a hat, a worksman hat, a flak jacket, high vis, and just make it look you just normal. But it's quite interesting. It's just, because it's quite a busy city centre, you can get away with. I mean, obviously there are cameras as well, but I think people get the impression that, are you going to spend a lot of time just guarding a statue, or just accept that it needs to be moved or come down, and it can, it was theatrical, poetic, it couldn't have come down in a more, amazing manner, and creating such huge a moment, and just joy and kind of weight that goes. Because you think once that's down, when you saw how the Society of Merchant Ventures responded, and they're only responding because the statue's down. The kind of, there's a brilliant poem by our poet laureate, if you haven't seen it, catch it, called Hollow, which she wrote, to mark the toppling of the statue, really just saying for all that might and whatever, it's just this hollow little thing inside. And I think it's also a sense of people owning their own power rather than expecting others, or, whether it's central government or local government. That's what I took, a younger generation, actually, because there were young people, I would say, by and large, in their 20s, 30s, just owning their own power. And I think, a time where there's so few job opportunities, and you can create different ways of looking and being, and maybe that's what it's about ultimately, how we can support one another and engage and create, a better society. There's a lot of work to do in Bristol, and there is a lot of work going on, at all different levels, and there's a lot of alternative. And the nice thing, is the kind of feeling that people, when opinion moves, because I can remember in the early days, the abuse that you'd get, from the local media, but that's completely shifted now. It's just, you think like the champions of ideas. And I think, just that everything and that's disingenuous about power, that's what Colston represents, really. The way it kind of bigs itself up and, does the terrible things, but actually recreates a narrative around it. If you do something appalling, it's a bit like, the natural narrative that we have, which we very much have in the UK around, Wilberforce actually ended slavery, which is ridiculous, isn't it? Rather than, well, actually, I think it's the uprising and a lot of ordinary people, kind of boycotting sugar and creating petitions and but yeah, narratives about who we are and what we are. We're in charge of our own narrative about our own city and, the struggles, the stories that are just not there, not unless we make them there or more visible in a way that we want to. Some of that's about knowledge as well, just having information and knowledge, so that's why, in terms, and some of that is about, but also you need the physical look at the city to engage with its past. So that's an ongoing one as well, as to how it looks. When you're there, you come in and think, yes, I don't know if any of you been to Berlin, because if you kind of go into a city, you just know something's happened there. That's what we need to achieve here in Bristol.
Okay, so one of the other questions that I had for you, which is kind of answered already, which was how pervasive is this continued influence of the Merchant Ventures Society in Bristol and beyond? Like how much influence do you think that they have in Bristol, and how is that kind of shown throughout Bristol? Well, that's kind of already been answered. So I don't know if you want to put anything else towards that, or if you want me to move on to the next question.
Yeah, the thing is about the most troubling thing, I think, for me and some of our members as well, Christine actually, is that they've gone into schools, they've gone into state schools. They kind of usually had schools that, very privileged schools. There'll be independent schools, and then, people pay for that. But, these are schools that are struggling. They're in city schools with a large percentage of Black and ethnic minority children. And they haven't done well in them at all. And I think, oh, what the hell are you doing there? there was a disclosure by a former head teacher of one of the girls' school that's changed its name, and he says they're not fit to run schools. You know, and you just think they've become an academy. I don't know what the schooling system's like, but when schools are really struggling, they seem to become academies and they get extra monies from the government. But, you know, that is troubling. And really, it kind of feels really, they shouldn't really be involved in public institutions. They shouldn't be given places on the council around. They kind of run, what is it, the Downs, which, and really because they're not electable, they're a private group of people, you know, so really they do need to disband. And I think there's lots of people, it's not just Counting Colston that kind of feel kind of that way, you know, who are they, what are they? You know, if you follow the problems around the plaque, that was intervention by the Society of Merchant Venturers. You know, initially there was supposed to be a plaque, what's it? The plaque of the Colston statue reworded. And we came in, well, the history members of the Counting Colston sorted out the wording, and then the Merchant Ventures vetoed. And I don't know how it works or why these things happen, but we don't know. You don't know who they are. They're now, you know, they've got a website with their names, so you have to see. But what is it they spend monies on, and how they influence? It is felt that they have, certainly in the past, significant influence across the city. But it is, you know, there was a similar society in Bristol, not in Bristol, in Liverpool, which is another previous slave trading port, but they've disbanded. But in Bristol, it still exists. You know, just have a look at their website and decide for yourself what you think. Yeah. Certainly, I don't think they should be in the public sector. If they want to meet as a private group of whatever, that's fine, but not, you know, into the affairs of the public. And certainly, they shouldn't be running schools. But yes, so we're kind of on that as well, really. Looking at, you can only, are you okay?
Hopefully, I think I muted in time. I was sneezing there. It was
okay. Yeah. So it's ongoing, because you do have to. You know, it's a lot of time, a lot of work and energy. So there'll be various people doing different things. You know, I'm always, you know, certainly in Bristol, you can be convinced there'll be someone doing some work on them. I know one of the members is quite keen to do some specific research on them, and in specifically, as I said, following the trail of the compensation money where that's been invested. Sorry, I think, have I answered all that?
Yeah, I think you have. So the last question that I had for you before Amia asks her questions is,
can I go back a bit? Because you were saying, I know,
oh yeah, sure.
There's a thing really about having a, you know, one of the Counting Colston, I think there should be a centre for memory, kind of wants an abolition shed, some building, a big building where we can actually reflect, do a whole range of things. It could be a place of reflection, have history, and look at the struggle for abolition globally, what it means, and ongoing kind of issues. But yeah, you know, and in terms of thinking and drawing up proposals, but I kind of think the benches by the wayside is doable. That's something I'll specifically be working hard on anyway. Money.
Okay. So the last question that I had was, how do you see your movement in relation to other movements within England and the UK, as well as movements across the Atlantic, such as, say, ones in the United States?
It's interesting when you describe it as a movement, because I just think, oh, it's just a few of us kind of campaigning, some of us are semi-retired, so we kind of got the time that we can actually do that. But I think it's about all of us, really, and what I've taken out of 2020 and hope with a younger generation that people are just actually looking at inequalities and injustice, looking at the curriculum, looking at, I don't know what's going on in your university in relation to decolonization, and actually
Right.
playing their part, because it's all the same narrative, isn't it? And it's about how we look out for one another, and it's about justice, really. How do you create a more just community and society, where people aren't struggling? And it's not just about one thing. I think people often put you into a little camp, and I say, well, anywhere, if I see something and I see it's wrong, I'll be out there. I'm not. And I think I'm going to go back to the image of George Floyd, because I think it's a powerful image for all of us to stay with us. Are we the bystanders that just sit, in the midst of gross injustice, pretending that we don't actually see what actually goes on around us? Because it takes a lot of people doing a lot of bystanding for injustices to keep, going on in our midst, in a kind of whatever. Whenever people tell the other thing, 2020, I don't know, I'd imagine it's the same. I don't use Facebook very much, but someone I knew, a colleague, who's probably the same age as me, I'm going to be 60 next year, I get on a bit, and she was recollecting growing up in Bristol in the 70s. As I said, I'm not from Bristol, and I have to say, I probably had a little bit of a halo, quite unusual experience of education. Went to school in the southeast, a school on the coast, actually a convent school. But it's probably one of the worst accounts. She just blurted it out on Facebook, and next time you look, there was about 200 or 300 responses because it was just so horrific. She starts with saying, the word, the N word was her name. That's how she was known at school. The teachers called her that. The pupils called her that. Every lunchtime, she had her dinner poured on her lap, and the dinner lady would prepare a separate meal for her. And you kind of read in this, and you think, what? What is this place? And I just think, for that level of abuse to happen, there's got to be a lot of people just watching and not doing anything. She said the teachers didn't do anything. And I'm just saying, reminding ourselves that terrible things happen, and some of us are witnessing this and choosing not to do anything, but some of us always are putting our heads forward, and there's beautiful examples. If I can remember, there was one of a asylum seeker being deported, and I think she was Swedish, on a plane, just stood up and just wouldn't sit down, and actually made them, they couldn't deport him because she had just stood up. It was on YouTube, but just kind of different things and how we look out, support. We're all part of a movement of caring for one another, particularly at a time of coronavirus, which disproportionately affects, people of color. I've known 3 people have died from the virus. And I just think it's given us a lot of food for thought, and actually look at what is it we're here for, is it just to amass what we can amass, at great expense? and some of us are kind of a bit more secure because we're kind of older and kind of got the, what can we do, in terms of contributing. And I think, giving time and creating work and is part of a bigger global narrative, of injustice. Really, I was kind of listening to a program just earlier, and you can see, younger people making those connections around, environment is a big issue. And I'm also a Quaker, I have to say, so part of the faith is about speaking truth to power and dealing with injustice. And I just think it's, if we all make it part of who and what we are and part of our life, we could move towards actually creating, a much better environment for really. So I hope there's an awakening. I think with every moment, there's also resistance. So you're going to get the march to the far right, and there is. I can remember the English Defence League, which is a far right group in Britain. There are particular issues around Muslims and Islam, and kind of them being allowed to march in Bristol a few years back. There was a huge, obviously, counter march. But I kind of looked when I went with some chalks, and I thought, I'm going to do some chalking here. Found myself kettled in, which is a new strategy where they stop you from moving out in a protest. But and then I was talking to a policeman, and I could tell that there's something else going on here. I actually thought this is a logistic arrangement of the police. They're doing some kind of logistics because they didn't come from Bristol. A policeman said he came from somewhere up north, which is probably about 300 miles away. Another one came. They were, so I thought, hang on a minute. So I think we always have to be quite vigilant and aware and kind of make links, because I think there are members of Counting Colston who are also part of the Bristol Radical History Group, and they're also part of anarchist groups as well, really. So I mean, the other thing I do, which I probably haven't mentioned, I kind of go out in the city centre on 3 days a year: International Women's Day, International Workers' Day, and Emancipation Day. So that's the 8th of March, the 1st of May, and the 1st of August. And I go with another activist colleague with chalks, and we chalk. And it's really to raise awareness and to engage. We can engage with passerby and kind of get them to look at issues that relate to themselves, but also look at our global sense of, I suppose they're kind of looking, this is how I make links to much a global kind of struggle and issues. So you're writing things, and sometimes they might be historically based or something that's been in the news. And then, whatever, I can remember thinking of years, been doing this since about 2009. And I have to say, this year we made a decision to locate the chalk event for Emancipation Day by the plinth of the toppled statue. And what we did notice, oh my God. The interesting thing about, if you're out there, you can actually kind of gauge where people are, what's troubling them sometimes. And, and it is really innocent at one level, because if people have got kids or grandkids, they can just scribble and do whatever. But it's got a message as well. And you often find that people, if they're from abroad, they're particularly, they're from Japan or whatever, they're really, or China, really, oh, I'm surprised you mark International Workers' Day, in Bristol, for example. Emancipation Day, because it is marked around the Caribbean, and it enabled us to link with the constant narrative and actually see where people are. But as I said, this year, you could tell that even from quite a young age, there were two 12-year-old girls, they were kind of white, and they joined. Usually just stay for about an hour and a half. But the energy, people stopping, young and old. And I just watched these two girls and I thought, they really are on the ball. They've really, the schools were shut actually for about 6 months. I don't know if it's the same in Canada. I thought they've got an education. Because obviously with the Tatlin, I heard them because you're kind of talking to people, writing things down, getting quotes off their phone from all kinds. I was duly impressed. And yeah, and you could see really the shift. Usually in the past, it'll be like, once you kind of engage and just say, oh, you kind of explain about slavery and how it's built in the city, they'll say things, can you forget? And I'll say no. Or they'll say things like, I feel guilty. That's the other thing that comes up. And I say, well, why do you feel guilty? Why do you personally feel guilty? You got ancestors that were, sugar merchants. And they wouldn't necessarily say it. They would just say, I just feel guilty. And I'm kind of thinking, I know Audre Lorde talks about guilt. You can either use it to empower you, or you can use it to not do anything at all. You can actually, because it's an opportunity to process what the guilt is about, any feelings, whether they're difficult and hard. And I think for a long time, people have been stuck with feelings that just makes them shut down. But this year, I noticed everyone wanted to talk. Everyone wanted to write something down. I think there was only one guy, an older guy, who could say he didn't believe in the top limb of the statue, which is fine, but, I could see a whole shift and wave of energy, thought, and understanding. And they're just random people that come across the centre, at 3 points of the year.
All right.
That's simple, it's something anyone can do about anything in any protest. Just get some chalks and get chalking.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. I will ask the last two questions. So the first question is, what do you think are the next key steps for the movement to take? Yeah, that's that one question.
I think it's going in lots of different directions. I think it's about memorials, and how we kind of move on that, and how we fundraise and move on that.
Mhm.
It's a key one. I think it's for an energy for a younger generation as well, to do, kind of feel that they can engage. I think in any place at any time there are struggles and challenges. And it's identifying them for yourself in your own location, and kind of working, and, finding people that can, it doesn't need a huge amount of people, 3 people can do wonders as well, and just keep working at it. I think the journey can be hard. If you have thought, when I kind of started out in 2002, you said in 2010 that statue is going to be toppled, the names are going to be changed. You thought, nah. And I can remember thinking, well, it'd be nice if the Colston Hall name changed before I died. I remember thinking that. And I just think, wow, you just have a whole, just one critical event, then everything just shifts. It's just like a little stack of cards that's just going, and people just really want to engage. And I would say, don't split into factions. Respect differences, because, I was kind of invited up north to Northern University, and there was some quite young students there. I was kind of sharing the film, and they came back and having a chat really. And they were kind of sharing how they're struggling and finding it, the girls really very bright, just getting very depressed. I said, sometimes it can feel like that. And I kind of gave them an anecdote. I said, I can remember being a young mum, so it's quite some time. Just feeling the way you do sometimes. Oh, anyway, there was an outing, a playgroup outing, and there was a minibus, and it was pouring with rain, and it was just miserable. But once you kind of set you're going out of the, we kind of live in a very built up, quite
Mhm.
claustrophobic. I just thought, whatever, we're just going out, So we kind of went out to the countryside somewhere, and it rain didn't let. How we went of this van, this myself and another mum. Everyone else, they didn't actually want to leave the van, and we're just going in the rain. And I can remember she said, "Don't you ever feel sometimes you want to scream?" Yeah. And we looked at each other and just, shall we? And I remember saying to the kids, so they joined in and they wouldn't be like, we just screamed at the top of our voice. And we were just walking, pushing the buggies and just screaming and screaming. It was so therapeutic, and we were chatting. And then we were kind of strolling back. And the rest of the group was still rattling around in the van saying, "Whoa, where have you been? Why are we going to be back?" We were so chilled. I think sometimes you do need an outlet to kind of.
You definitely do.
Yeah. So that's an anecdote. Find some, and I remember them saying, "Where can we go to scream?" I said, "Find a graveyard.
Anyway.
In winter, if you're lucky to have a shore in the winter, it'll be empty." And
Yes.
yeah.
That's funny. Okay, so my last question is, you kind of already outlined it a little bit. So as students, we know this generation is best friends with social media.
Yeah.
So what are ways for us to raise awareness, and how are we able to participate, being in Canada, a little bit far from Bristol? How are we able to kind of participate in the movement through those outlets?
Are you looking specifically at countering Colston, or are you looking at your own issues, or
specifically this issue? Because personally, I didn't really know about it. I'm a human rights major, and this would have been a huge topic, but I didn't really know about it until this class right now.
Okay.
Because there's many things to Atlantic slavery. Is a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
But how are we able to participate? I know the movement of Black Lives Matter went global and still is, but the only ways that I saw my generation kind of participate in that is posting on social media and just saying, "Here, I posted, that means I support it." But I personally don't think that's enough.
But specific things, there must be going on, whether it's Indigenous people or kind of, I'm just thinking, I don't know the area that you are, whether you do things off campus. Do you do anything?
Well, I'd like to call myself a children's rights activist. That's my specialty.
Oh, okay, children's.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
That's what I kind of advocate for. But being a global rights, human rights major, all this stuff is extremely relevant, because I don't think you can only focus on one thing. You can specialize in one thing, but there's a lot of different outlets that you must kind of advocate for.
It's quite interesting in terms of children, because one of the things that's come up, during the lockdown here was about school hunger, and child hunger, children on free school meals.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a similar thing, really.
Yeah.
And certainly, there's been a footballer in that's kind of campaigned so that children are fed, because the schools actually provide that for school. And obviously, if you're not in school, you don't actually kind of get that extra supplement. I think wherever poor people are, there's going to be issues, isn't there? Wherever there's homeless, there's going to be issues. Wherever there's, whatever. I think, I think you need to have something that speaks to you, that you feel passionate about, because it's not going to work if you just kind of, it needs to come from a place of, right, a place of truth and sincerity. And I think, that there are injustices because that's how the world works. That's how a capitalist economy runs, isn't it? Someone's got to be at the bottom, and I don't know what's the situation in relation to asylum seekers, Indigenous people. I think, for Countering Colston, I mean, obviously we got the website. It should be updated. I think it's just nice just to kind of see where we are and what we're doing. But I think, there's lots of other things going on. It's not necessarily one thing or the other. I think in terms of looking at what it is sort of being taught in schools about history and heritage and colonization. It's is British colonial history taught in schools?
Sorry,
is British colonial history taught in schools?
So I think some, but like universities, I'm thinking yes, but like elementary schools, I have never really like heard about it.
It's mainly taught from the Canadian perspective, with the Canadian perspective being something as other, but not completely other as the British perspective. Like, we don't hear about like this decision happened in the British Parliament. It's like this decision was made for Canadians, and nothing more on what's actually going on in the UK other than what directly affects Canada.
Okay, yeah. Because I was in Canada a couple of years ago. I was in Vancouver, UBC. I was invited there to just do residency actually as an artist, and they were doing some stuff around the Indigenous. Well, the university's built on the land of Indigenous peoples. So they did have a ceremony, I remember, whilst I was there, and it was very moving. And I kind of thought I didn't need First Nation. And I kind of saying, well, what did you think of the ceremony? It felt very genuine and moving. And I was quite impressed, actually. I was quite impressed. In terms of strides of how you kind of address, inequalities. And they had a residential school that they were setting up. But I think there are things there, and how do you add value, when you meet people and engage. I've actually got a relative that's a human rights lawyer. The reality is just getting in loggerhead with the American government. Putting out policies that are not for the benefit of the island. That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot of issues, so it's kind of hard to tackle all of them at once. But again,
it's just finding something small and just kind of running with it, really. But
we just have the privilege of actually going to university and being educated. It gives us to do all that stuff. So it's good to kind of raise awareness.
And it is a privilege, and actually remember that is a privilege, and what we choose to do with the education, that's the bit that makes a difference. Because that's the thing that always slightly bothered me when I came to Bristol. So we got this university here, and it's especially one of these Russell League universities, constantly churning out reports. But interesting, we've actually got a couple of members, or one member from the university in Colston. But there's always as well slightly points, because it's an institution, so an institution has its own culture and ways of being and ways of surviving as well. And it's got money as well. It's a business, so there's always pressure points and differences as to. But it's good to have allies there, and certainly I have had support, both from your university there in terms of, my work, which is good. So, keep up the good work. Yeah, just keep an eye out, and whatever. There will be something that speaks to you, and you think, I've really got to do something here. Because it'll pull at you, and you can't, ignore it really. But
yeah, I definitely agree with you. Thank you so much for the amazing input. Like, I personally learned so much from you right now. I think my partners did too. So I just wanted, we wanted to say, on our behalf of the whole class, we'd like to thank you for taking the time to actually inform us of all of this. We really, really appreciate it. And I think our whole class is probably going to appreciate listening to this.
Okay, I hope you got some.
So much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and do follow us on the website as well.
Yeah, definitely. We will definitely do that. All right. Thank you so much. Have a
Yeah.
great day.
Yeah,
Have a great day.
yeah. Cheers. Bye.
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 Mitchell and who's the other person? with the mic?
Andrew.
Me, yes.
Andrew. I can't see
Thank
you.
you again.
Oh, there. Bye. I hope that was
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
yeah. If you kind of got anything else really that comes to you, just let us know really. But it's lots of stuff on the website and anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
honestly, if there's any questions, we have your
Yeah.
email. You can definitely get in contact.
Cheers.
Alright.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Why did he leave?
I don't know why Andrew just left.
Okay, it's fine. We're done anyway.
Okay,
It's good.
I'm gonna just leave because I know
Yeah,
that
alright.
stops the recording by default. So I'm gonna
All right.
yeah.
Bye-bye then.
See ya.